All right, so this is how we're going to write the name of a formula unit if we were given the formula, okay? So the first step here, it says determine the name of the cation. So we look at our symbols, and I see PB, and then I see O. I have two capital letters, all right, and I have one lowercase letter. This first capital letter and the lowercase letter, that is my cation. So this whole thing is my cation. And PB, I determined to be lead. So lead is going to be the name. So I'm going to write the word lead, L-E-A-D, and I'm going to leave a little space. The second thing says determine the name of the anion. So the anion is the second part here, the O, all right? And it says hint. If it's more than one type of element, it's polyatomic, so you got to look on table E. Otherwise, it's a monatomic, it's going to end in IDE. Well, I know that O is going to be oxide, and I'm going to leave a little space here at oxide, okay? So actually, let me move this name over here. So I'm going to lead, and then I'm going to write oxide next to it, but I'm going to leave a space in between it, and I'll show you why in a second. So lead oxide. Number 3 says look at the charge of the cation. So I'm going to look at the charge of PB, and it says hint. If it's more than one charge, look at the anion charge and determine what cation charge balances the anion with multiple charges. Just add a Roman numeral to the cation name. That sounds easy, right? So we got to look at PB. So we're going to pull up our periodic table here. So periodic table, where'd it go? Let me pull up the periodic table, and now we need to find PB. So PB is over here in group 14, so we can go down to about 14. And lo and behold, lead has two oxidation numbers. It's got a 2 and a 4. And just like in the last one, we know that if it has two oxidation numbers, I'm going to need to know which one I'm talking about in the name. So the 2 charge is going to have a Roman numeral 2. The 4 charge is going to have a Roman numeral 4. Okay? So we have 2 possible charges. So now let's go back to our worksheet here. So lead is going to be either a +2 or a +4. +2 or +4. Oxide only has one charge. Oxide is only a 2-. A 2-. So which one of those is going to make my formula neutral? Well, you got to look at the formula, and the formula shows that we have 1 lead and we have 1 oxide. So we need a 1-to-1 ratio, so it's going to have to be this scenario here where we have a +2 and a -2. And so it's going to be the +2 variety of lead. So I'm going to put in the Roman numeral. So it's going to be lead 2 oxide. The compound's name is the cation name, Roman numeral if it's needed, and then the anion name. That's why I left a little space. If you don't need the space, you just leave it, and you can squish them together if you want, but it's not really that necessary. CaOH2. CaOH2. So the first thing, Ca, all right, that is calcium. So I'm going to write calcium, C-A-L-C-I-U-M, calcium. OH, I have 2 different elements. 2 different elements means we're going to have a polyatomic ion. So I got to find OH on table E, and it turns out to be hydroxide. So again, I'm going to leave a little space and write the word hydroxide. So calcium hydroxide. Now we got to look at the charges. We got to look at the charges of calcium to see if there's more than one and if a Roman numeral is needed. So let's bring up our periodic table. Erase these. We don't need that anymore. Move over here to calcium, which is in group 2. This is why you want to kind of know where things are. It's important to be able to find them quickly. Calcium, as it turns out, only has a +2. So we don't need to say which calcium we're talking about here because there's only one calcium. All right? And so once we know that there's only one calcium, the name is done. The compound's name is the cation name, calcium, the anion name, hydroxide, and no Roman numerals are needed because there's only one type of calcium. And because that's going to be balanced. Because if you think about it, what we have going on here is I have one positive 2 ion, and I have 2 negative 1s. And that's why there's not going to be any need. But you don't put any numbers, you don't put any subscripts or superscripts or anything in the name. It's just simply calcium hydroxide. Mg3N2. All right? Mg is, look it up and write it down. Mg is magnesium. N, look it up. It's nitride. Remember, you got to change the suffix, the ending, to IDE because it is an ion and it's a monatomic ion. So now we look on the periodic table and we discover that magnesium only has one type of charge. There's only a +2 variety. So once we know that there's only a +2, no Roman numerals are needed. So the name is just simply magnesium nitride, and that is the end. You need not go any further. There are no subscripts. There are no Roman numerals in the name because there's only one oxidation number for magnesium. If you're wondering, those are all the different Roman numerals 1 through 10. Yes, you kind of got to know those. Copy those down if needed. Now this can get a little bit tricky. Here's an example. CuSO4 and Cu2SO4. All right. Well, Cu is copper. So I'm going to write copper for both of these. Copper. And then the anion is sulfate, SO4. So I'm going to write those in, leaving a space. So these are 2 different versions of copper sulfate. But we can't just leave it like that because this one up here is CuSO4. This one down here is Cu2SO4. This one, the bottom, there are 2 copper atoms to balance out 1 sulfate. The top has 1 copper atom to balance out 1 sulfate ion. So we got to figure out, by looking on the periodic table, the different oxidation states of copper and looking on table E to determine the oxidation state of sulfate. So copper can be both a +1 and a +2. Sulfate, however, is only a -2. So in the top scenario here, I have 1-to-1 ratio, 1 copper to 1 sulfate, because there's no, remember the whole sulfate is SO4. I have 1 copper, I have 1 sulfate. So in order to balance that out, I have to have 1 copper and 1 sulfate. So this top one is copper 2 sulfate. The bottom one, I have 2 of these. I have 2 coppers. So I'm going to need 2 of the +1 variety of copper to balance out 1 -2 variety of sulfate. So this one is going to be copper 1 sulfate. This is tricky because if you look at the formula, you think, well, wait a minute. This one over here, copper 2 sulfate, there's only 1 copper in it. But that Roman numeral is to tell you the charge. It's not to tell you how many of those things there are. All right? So it's copper 2 sulfate for CuSO4, copper 1 sulfate for Cu2SO4. So I'd like you to finish up that side 16 through 30, and when you're done, submit those. Thank you.